word problems with rational equations and rational inequalities. The first type of word problem we're going to discuss is a work problem. This is the generic formula for these types of problems. 1 over the time for the individual person or object plus 1 over the individual time for the person or object plus if there's more than 2 people or 2 objects, then you keep adding more fractions. And then it's going to equal 1 over the combined or total time for everybody together. So keeping that in mind, construction of the Rainbow Bridge in southeast Texas took about 700 days to complete. If a second crew was added, construction would have been completed in 525 days. How long would it take the second crew to complete the bridge if worked alone? So using the basic setup, so the first crew by themselves was 700 days. So that's 1 over 700. Plus, if we added the second crew, we don't know how much or how long it would take by themselves. So we can put X for that. And then it's equal to the combined time was 525 days. So this is the equation for this particular problem. To solve it, we need to find our least common denominator. And the least common denominator will be when we multiply the 2 denominators together. So that's 700 times 525. Now that's a little too high. So let's figure out what other denominator they might have in common. So we would have to break it down like normal. Or just combine them and then we can reduce later. That's perfectly fine. Yep. There is a smaller one, but again, you could always combine and figure it out later. So to distribute the LCD we're using into the equation, so when I distribute it to the first term, the 700 would disappear, leaving the 525x. When I distribute it to the second one, the x will disappear, which would leave 700 times 525. Bring down my equal sign and distribute it to the last term. The 525 will cancel, leaving the 700 and the x. So the first thing I would do is multiply 700 with 525. And I just demonstrated that that was 367,500. Now, since the powers of my x terms are 1, this is linear, so I would subtract 525 from both sides. Bring down the 36,700. So this would leave me with 175x. And then divide both sides by 175 to get x. And you get 2100. So 2100 is equal to x. So in other words, it would take the second crew 2100 days to complete if worked by themselves. Mr. Judd takes 10 hours to paint a shed. However, Mr. Wynn has purchased the Paint Master Blaster and can paint a shed in 4 hours. If they work together to paint the shed, how long will it take? Round to the nearest hundred. So for Judd, it would be 1 over 10 hours plus Mr. Wynn is 1 over 4 hours, and it's equal to 1 over their combined, which is x for now, hours. So again, our common denominator, just simply multiply using 10 and 4 and x and distribute. Now, I'm not using the least common denominator, I'm just using a denominator, and in these cases, it is perfectly fine. In other cases, it might be beneficial to you to find the least common denominator because the numbers would be smaller. When I distribute to the first term, the 10 cancels, leaving me with 4x plus. Distribute it to the next term, the 4's will cancel, leaving me with 10x. Bring down the equal sign. Distribute it to the last, the x's would cancel, leaving me with 10 times 4. So that's 4x plus 10x, which is 14x, equals 4 times 10, which is 40. Now divide both sides by 14. X is equal to, and we said round to the hundredths place, which is 2 decimal places. So it's about 2.86 hours. Please label with the appropriate units, since it's real world. Please work on this one on your own. Again, round to the nearest hundred. Now we're going to talk about solving inequalities. To solve inequalities, you need to first find the restricted domain or restricted values for x. To find the restricted values for x, let's look at the denominator. So whatever x terms we have in the denominator, we set those equal to 0. So the restricted is the x term, so there's only one x term, and it's just x, equal it to 0 and solve. So the restricted x is x. I'm sorry, is 0. If there was more to it, I would tell you, but for now, it's just 0. Now we need to find the least common denominator and multiply it by every term to find the solutions, like we did in the last lesson. So in this particular case, the LCD is 3x. So multiply 3x with all terms. With the first term, the 3 will cancel, leaving me with x times x. Bring down the minus sign. In the next term, the x will cancel, leaving me with 3 times 1. We're going to treat it as an equal sign for now. When I multiply with the last term, the 3 will cancel, leaving me with x times x plus 1. So x times x is x squared minus 3 times 1, which is 3. Distribute the x into the parentheses to give you x squared plus x. Since I have square terms, the objective is to get all terms to the same side, so I would subtract x squared from both sides. In the process, I would be left with a negative 3 equals x. Well, my x squared terms disappeared, so I don't have to do the quadratic formula on this particular problem, which is nice, because I already know what x is equal to. X is equal to negative 3. So I have my restricted x value. I also have my solution. My solution is x equals negative 3. Now we're going to make a number line. Where we're going to have 0 and negative 3 on there. And then we're going to find numbers on either side of these particular numbers. So a number to the left of negative 3 is negative 4. A number between negative 3 and 0 is negative 1. And a number larger than 0 is positive 1. So however many intervals you have is where you got to find a solution or a number. And then you're going to test that value in the original problem to see if it makes sense. So everywhere I see x, I'm going to replace it with the values that I just chose. And again, you can pick any numbers as long as they are in those specific intervals. So the first number I'm going to use is negative 4. Notice every x becomes negative 4. And then I have to do it again 2 more times where every x becomes negative 1, and then every x will become positive 1. So alpha y equals 1. So negative 4 over 3 minus 1 over negative 4. And that equals negative 13 over 12. I also need to do the other side. So negative 4 plus 1 over 3. So we're seeing is negative 13 over 12 less than negative 1. And yes, that is true. So I'm going to highlight this region because this is true. Now we need to find another region that is true. With the other test point. This time it's negative 1. So change all my 4's to 1's. So that's 2/3. And then this 4 needs to become 1 as well. So 2/3 versus 0. Is 2/3 less than 0? No, that's false. So we're not going to highlight that region. So now I'm going to test with positive 1. Negative 2/3. negative 2/3 and positive 2/3. And negative 2/3 is less than positive 2/3, so that's true. So let's highlight that region. So the solution to this particular inequality is x is less than negative 3 or x is greater than 0.